It happened in Moscow, the city that once pulsed with power, now eerily silent under digital blackout. At exactly 9:47 p.m. local time, the Kremlin pulled the plug. 6 million residents found themselves cut off from the world. Bank apps froze, delivery systems collapsed. Even hospitals couldn't access cloud servers. For the first time since the fall of the Soviet Union, Russia's capital went dark. Not from bombs, but from its own government. At the same moment, cameras captured something far stranger inside the Kremlin walls. Vladimir Putin appeared in a public meeting, his hand trembling, swollen, and covered in bulging veins. No AI filter, no digital mask. The image spread faster than Moscow could censor it. The supposed strongman of Russia, visibly decaying, struggling to maintain control. Within hours, Telegram channels lit up with panic. "He's falling apart," one insider whispered. "Both the man and the system." By dawn, Moscow's internet blackout became the new Iron Curtain. Rumors swirled of a desperate attempt to contain leaks about Putin's health and a possible crisis at the top of the Russian chain of command. Intelligence analysts in Washington called it the most telling signal of instability inside Russia since 1991. And then, the unthinkable happened. A leaked recording from Beijing surfaced, allegedly capturing Putin and Xi Jinping in a private discussion about extending life through experimental medicine. The video vanished hours later, but by then, the question had already ignited across the West. Is Putin's failing body dragging an entire empire into collapse? The Kremlin blackout didn't come out of nowhere. It was the culmination of months of paranoia, secrecy, and visible physical decline at the top of Russia's leadership. Putin, once the picture of control and composure, now seemed more like a man at war with his own body. The internet bans across Russian regions were not just acts of censorship, they were defensive measures, part of a regime trying to hide its own internal rot. To understand this moment, one must go back to early 2022, when Putin launched his so-called special military operation. He promised victory within 72 hours. Nearly 3 years later, the war has spread into Russia itself, economically, digitally, and psychologically. Sanctions have severed Moscow's financial arteries, with Russia's GDP contracting by an estimated 7.4% since 2023. Western analysts note that nearly 400,000 skilled professionals have fled the country, creating a brain drain unseen since the Soviet collapse. Yet the Kremlin insists everything is under control. It's an old Soviet reflex: deny weakness, display strength. But that illusion began cracking the moment Putin's trembling hand hit global screens. Russian social media exploded before being silenced. Even longtime supporters whispered that the president no longer looked like the man they once feared. In this climate of decay, the contrast could not be sharper. Ukraine, battered but innovative, has become a laboratory for next-generation warfare, producing over 4 million drones a year, according to Defense News. Meanwhile, Russia, the self-proclaimed superpower, is reduced to copying Iranian technology and recruiting prisoners to fill its ranks. The symbolism is stark. A frail leader clinging to power as his country turns inward, cutting off communication lines and crushing dissent to keep an image alive. The Kremlin has always ruled through control. But what happens when the controller loses control of his own body? As Moscow's blackout deepens and Putin's health becomes a national obsession, one thing is clear: the war he started abroad is now consuming him at home. The first real signs of collapse appeared quietly, not in the headlines, but in the data. On February 19, 2025, several Russian internet monitoring agencies noticed massive packet losses across Western Russia. Within an hour, St. Petersburg's digital traffic dropped by 83%. Within 2, Moscow followed. Government media claimed it was a technical upgrade, but cyber analysts in Estonia traced the source: a coordinated shutdown of civilian access ordered by the Ministry of Digital Development. The Kremlin wasn't upgrading anything, it was isolating its population. Inside the Kremlin compound, chaos reigned. Intelligence leaks suggest that Putin's inner circle, including Defense Minister Andrei Belousov and Security Council Chief Nikolai Patrushev, were split over how much of the truth to reveal. Putin, visibly frail, reportedly insisted on total information lockdown. He didn't want images of his swollen hands or his hesitant gait circulating beyond Russia's borders. To him, weakness was a weapon in the enemy's hands. But the cover-up only drew more attention. Independent Russian journalists, operating through encrypted networks in exile, began sharing footage of malfunctioning cell towers and entire city blocks losing access to the web. A mother in Kazan told a foreign broadcaster she could no longer contact her son fighting near Pokrovsk. "He's gone silent," she said, "maybe forever." Her voice trembled, caught between fear and exhaustion, the new sound of Russia's home front. Then came the twist no one expected. Chinese state media accidentally released raw footage from a closed-door summit between Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin in Harbin. In the video, Putin's left hand spasmed repeatedly while aides rushed to adjust his chair. A muffled line caught on a hot mic spread like wildfire. "We must find a way to extend life." Within 24 hours, Beijing scrubbed the clip, citing technical interference. But the genie was already out. The world saw a weakened autocrat grasping at immortality while his empire unraveled. Meanwhile, in Moscow's hospitals, doctors reported unprecedented shortages of imported medical equipment. Sanctions had blocked supplies of advanced cancer drugs and diagnostic machines. Even government insiders whispered that the president's health requires foreign precision tools, no longer available under sanctions. The rumor that his personal physicians had flown in from China only fueled speculation. By early March, the blackout extended beyond the web. ATMs stopped dispensing cash in parts of St. Petersburg. Supermarket scanners failed. Taxi apps crashed mid-ride. It was digital paralysis, a nation unplugged from itself. The irony was bitter. The Kremlin had spent billions building its own RuNet system to survive Western cyber attacks, yet the real shutdown came from within. As panic spread, Putin made a rare television appearance. His voice was calm, his movements rigid. The background looked artificial. Analysts later noted digital artifacts suggesting AI manipulation. His message? Russia stands united. The West will fail to divide us. But the public saw something else. A man barely holding his pen, a leader shielding his left hand behind a folder, and millions of Russians began to ask, not aloud, but silently, if the strongman can't control his own health, can he still control the state? The next morning, crowds formed outside government offices, demanding internet access be restored. Riot police arrived within minutes. Tear gas filled the air near Nevsky Prospect. Footage of clashes leaked through encrypted VPNs before being scrubbed again. Yet for every video deleted, 10 new ones appeared. The blackout had backfired. The very act meant to conceal weakness became proof of it. By the end of that week, Moscow's silence was broken only by whispers. He's not well. The empire is cracking. The consequences of Putin's personal and political unraveling have cascaded across every layer of Russian life. What began as an isolated blackout is now a nationwide disconnection, not just from the internet, but from reality itself. According to data leaked by independent telecom analysts, over 110 million Russians now experience some form of digital restriction. Only government-approved websites remain accessible. Messaging apps are filtered, VPNs are blocked. The Kremlin calls it information sovereignty. To many Russians, it feels like suffocation. Economically, the effects are devastating. Moscow's stock exchange, already fragile after Western sanctions, has plunged another 14% since the blackout began. The ruble trades at 132 to the dollar, its weakest level since 2022. International investors have fled, and China, once Russia's last major partner, has reportedly delayed several infrastructure projects, citing instability in data security. Russia's technology sector, once employing nearly 2.5 million workers, now faces mass layoffs as digital operations grind to a halt. The blackout has crippled logistics, paralyzed banks, and even hit the military. Ukrainian intelligence sources claim that Russian communication failures delayed troop coordination around Pokrovsk and Belgorod, allowing precision drone strikes that destroyed 17 armored vehicles and 5 ammunition depots in just 3 nights. Western defense analysts describe it as a cyber chokehold, self-inflicted.
Socially, the blackout is producing what one Moscow sociologist calls the silent rebellion. Families can no longer reach relatives on the front lines. Young people resort to handwritten notes and underground Bluetooth networks to share banned news. In provincial towns, posters appear overnight with slogans like, "If he's healthy, why hide him?" And "When the leader disappears, so does truth." Police tear them down by morning, but the sentiment spreads faster than propaganda. Inside elite circles, the silence is deafening. Oligarchs in London whisper that the Kremlin is split between continuists who want to preserve Putin's legacy and stabilizers who quietly discuss a managed transition before the situation spins out of control. Western intelligence reports confirm that at least 3 high-ranking generals have been reassigned after questioning the president's fitness to rule. For the first time since the Chechen Wars, the Russian Ministry of Defense operates without Putin's direct oversight during daily briefings. The human toll is staggering. Russia's defense ministry has stopped publishing casualty data altogether, yet internal leaks suggest the war has cost the country over 580,000 troops, killed, wounded, or missing. That's nearly the population of St. Petersburg's youth under 25. Economists warn that the demographic hole could shrink Russia's labor force by 9% within 5 years. Meanwhile, over 6 million citizens have left since 2022. Engineers, teachers, and doctors. Most will never return. As Putin's health visibly deteriorates, his paranoia deepens. Analysts describe a leader trapped in a shrinking circle of trust, surrounded by security chiefs and doctors flown in from abroad. Western media outlets, from Reuters to Defense News, report that the Kremlin has purchased advanced life support systems from Chinese suppliers under a medical equipment cover contract worth $48 million. Moscow denies everything, but even pro-Kremlin journalists avoid showing the president's hands in new broadcasts. The irony is brutal. For decades, Putin built his image as the eternal strongman, bare-chested, decisive, immortal. Now, his greatest enemy is time itself. His body falters as his nation fractures. What was meant to be a digital firewall has become a mirror, reflecting the decay of a system that can no longer sustain its own myth. Across Russia, from Kaliningrad to Vladivostok, people whisper the same phrase. When the screen goes black, something is dying behind it, but few dare to finish the sentence aloud. The Moscow blackout has rippled far beyond Russia's borders, shaking global alliances and recalibrating power dynamics from Washington to Beijing. Western intelligence agencies tracking the Kremlin's digital isolation call it the most significant internal disruption since the fall of the Soviet Union. What began as a personal crisis for one man has evolved into a geopolitical aftershock, one that both allies and adversaries are scrambling to interpret. In Washington, President Donald Trump has ordered a full intelligence review of Russia's communication breakdown. His administration, while cautious to avoid direct confrontation, views the blackout as a strategic opportunity. The US Cyber Command has intensified surveillance of Russian data traffic, believing that the Kremlin's isolation could reveal hidden military vulnerabilities. Meanwhile, the Pentagon is quietly studying how Ukraine's battlefield tactics, particularly its low-cost drone swarms and decentralized communication systems, are outperforming Russia's aging, rigid command networks. Across Europe, NATO commanders describe the situation as a live case study in authoritarian collapse. Poland and Finland have bolstered border surveillance, fearing cyber spillovers from Russia's unstable networks. Germany's Bundestag held an emergency session after energy markets reacted to fears of another Russian infrastructure meltdown. Oil prices spiked 6% overnight when rumors surfaced that Russia's own refineries had been hit by cyber malfunctions caused by the blackout. China, on the other hand, is walking a diplomatic tightrope. Officially, Beijing expresses solidarity with Moscow. Unofficially, the Chinese leadership is alarmed. The leaked Harbin summit video, showing Putin's trembling hand and talk of extending life, has embarrassed Xi Jinping's government. Chinese state media now limits coverage of their partnership, and economic advisors in Beijing are reportedly reconsidering the pace of joint energy projects. No one invests in a collapsing empire, one insider admitted. In the Middle East, Iran has doubled its drone exports to Russia, yet even Tehran's officials privately acknowledge that Moscow is bleeding cash. Russian military debt to Iranian suppliers now exceeds $4.3 billion, according to intelligence estimates. Meanwhile, Israel's defense analysts warned that Russia's reliance on Iranian drones is giving Tehran valuable battlefield data that could later threaten Western allies. In other words, Putin's desperation is feeding the ambitions of others. Global military strategists are watching the doctrine shift in real time. The war in Ukraine has proved that agility and artificial intelligence now outweigh brute force. A $500 drone can destroy a $3 million tank, and Ukraine's engineers have mastered that asymmetry. The United States, NATO, and even Japan are adapting lessons from Ukraine's battlefield to reshape their own arsenals. A Western defense report calls Ukraine's drone network the Silicon Valley of modern warfare. But the blackout inside Russia has triggered a second, quieter revolution: the information war. As Moscow citizens lose access to independent news, the global public gains unprecedented insight into the Kremlin's collapse through satellite intelligence, leaks, and open-source investigations. Western think tanks now predict that Russia's internal communications failures could accelerate the country's political fragmentation within 6 to 9 months if the war and the censorship continue. In diplomatic corridors, the tone has shifted from fear to calculation. NATO officials whisper about post-Putin scenarios. European banks prepare contingency plans for the ruble's further decline. Even India, long friendly with Moscow, has begun cutting oil purchases, citing payment instability. The message is unmistakable. The world smells weakness. Still, the most profound impact may be psychological. For decades, Russia cultivated fear of its missiles, its spies, its leader. But fear fades when the image cracks. A frail Putin clutching his chair under bright lights has replaced the myth of invincibility. In a world ruled by perception, that is lethal. The Kremlin's blackout was meant to hide this image. Instead, it illuminated it for everyone to see. And now, the question haunting every capital is not whether Russia can still win, but whether it can even hold itself together long enough to survive the year. The world has seen strongmen fall before, but rarely has the descent been so visible, so digital, and so self-inflicted. What began with a trembling hand and a flickering broadcast has turned into a full-scale national blackout. The Russian Federation, once proud of its cyber prowess and intelligence reach, now struggles to connect its own people. The empire that once projected dominance through propaganda is now silenced by its own fear of truth. Putin's health crisis has become the symbol of a broader decay. The body of a man reflecting the body of a nation. His swollen veins, his frozen gestures, his digitally manipulated images, all of them mirror a regime addicted to illusion. Every attempt to hide weakness only exposes it more. Every blackout sparks another light of resistance. For years, the Kremlin built its legitimacy on control. Now, that very control is suffocating it from within. Abroad? The implications are enormous. NATO sees a wounded giant stumbling in the dark. China sees a partner turned liability. The West, cautious but watchful, sees the possible end of an era, the twilight of Putinism. Yet history rarely ends cleanly. Empires collapse in confusion, in secrecy, in whispers before they fall to the ground. And Russia's whispers are getting louder. So now, the world waits. Will Putin's physical decline ignite the political implosion his enemies have long predicted? Will Russia's blackout expand into a nationwide crisis that fractures the Federation itself? Or will the Kremlin find one last way to survive, through repression, deception, or something even darker? One thing is certain, in 2025, truth itself has become the most dangerous weapon in Russia. And no firewall, no AI mask, no propaganda can fully contain it. The war Putin started abroad has finally reached his doorstep. And as the lights go out in Moscow, the question remains: will Russia ever find its way back into the world? Or is this the moment it disappears into its own shadow?